Don't stress about it. No one's going to remember what you did here anyway. That line just kind of hung there in the silence of Nathan's sleek, glassy office, while I stared down at the severance agreement I'd just electronically signed. 5 years of grinding out 70-hour weeks, reduced to one click and a flippant remark. I kept my face calm, even though I could feel the pressure building in my chest. I appreciate the opportunity, I said, standing up from the chair like I was still trying to win a professionalism award. That's me, Riley Morgan, Senior Systems Engineer. Well, former Senior Systems Engineer. As of about 3 minutes ago, Nathan Drake, our picture-perfect CEO, didn't even glance up from whatever was glowing on his laptop screen. The sun was pouring in through those floor-to-ceiling windows, installed after our Series A round dropped $10 million into the business, and it lit up his salon-styled hair like something out of a commercial. I stepped out into the open office layout and made my way past clusters of engineers who had no idea today was my last day. Some of them were probably neck-deep in code I'd written, lines I'd crafted during SHUP-deprived all-nighters, code that was basically the nervous system of the whole product. The system architecture we relied on? That was my baby, built back when we were crammed into a run-down warehouse downtown with no AC, and I was sweating through my shirt while hammering out custom logic. Calling it early? Jared asked from his desk, one of the newer hires who didn't have the faintest clue what was going on. Something like that, I told him, tossing him a smile that never quite reached my eyes. I didn't have much to pack. A little plant, a framed photo of my sister's family, and a coffee mug I never got around to washing out. That was it. 5 years of my life, fitting neatly into one canvas tote. Everything else I had, my time, my energy, my focus, I'd poured straight into this company. Waiting for the elevator, I suddenly felt a chill run down my spine. Nathan's jab about nobody remembering my work. It wasn't just petty, it was flat out wrong. That system architecture? Every line had my fingerprint on it. The structure of the documentation was in my own shorthand, built around how I thought and solved problems. I'd always meant to write the official guide, but that kept getting pushed down the list. Something more urgent always came up. The elevator doors slid open and I stepped inside. As they started to close, I caught one final look at the office that had felt like home for half a decade. A thought hit me then. They really didn't understand what they'd just done. I wasn't mad. Not yet, anyway. But I was suddenly acutely aware of just how much value I'd brought and exactly where to find every original design draft, version log, and IP-related document with my name tied to it. See, I grew up watching my dad get screwed over. He was a genius, designed a revolutionary battery system back in the 90s. Then his company went public, kicked him out, and wiped his name from the history books. I swore I wouldn't let that happen to me. And yet, here I was, 29 years old, leaving Codaxis with nothing more than a severance check and an NDA I'd read like a hawk before signing. That agreement covered company secrets, sure, but it didn't say a word about my own methods or the files I'd quietly sent to my personal attorney before ever stepping into Nathan's office. I'd seen it coming for weeks. The whispered hallway chats, the meetings I wasn't invited to anymore, the way Nathan started parading Marcus, the so-called consultant, in front of our investors. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being smart. On the drive home, I called Camille Harper, my lawyer. "Well, it's official," I said. "They let me go. Said they wanted someone with more experience." "I see," she said calmly. "And the severance?" 6 months' salary. Standard NDA. Nothing out of the ordinary about intellectual property. Just the usual clause from my contract. "You're a smart one," she said, and I could tell she was smiling on the other end. "The files you sent look solid. Let's sit down tomorrow and talk options." The next morning, I didn't feel that usual compulsion to check my loop chat or sort through my inbox. Instead, I slept in until 9 for the first time in who knows how long. Made a decent breakfast. Then I drove over to Camille's office feeling lighter than I expected. She had everything laid out across the conference table. architecture schematics, version control logs, emails that clearly spelled out my work. Most importantly, she had proof I was the one who developed the custom authentication system that set Codaxis apart in the market. "You've been thorough," she said, scanning the table. "Most folks don't think to cover themselves like this." "My dad taught me to keep receipts," I said with a half smile. "So what do you want to do with all this?" she asked, gesturing to 5 years of my life spread across her table. I sat down, thinking it through. I wasn't the revenge type. I didn't grow up with that kind of mindset. But I did grow up knowing what I was worth, and not to let anyone take that away. "Nothing, for now," I said slowly. "But I want to be ready." She nodded, like she understood exactly where I was coming from. "They'll come back. Companies like this always do, once they realize what they've lost. And when they do, we'll be ready." When I left her office, I felt peaceful, in a way I hadn't in years. For the first time in forever, my time was mine, and I had every intention of using it wisely. 3 weeks later, I was sitting at a beachside cafe, sipping an overpriced latte and browsing job boards on my phone when it buzzed. The caller ID lit up. Derek Langston, Codaxis's CTO. "Riley," he said, putting on that overly friendly tone. "How've you been?" "I'm fine, Derek," I said coolly. "What's up?" "Well," he started, "the team's working on the upcoming release, and they've run into some questions about the system architecture you set up. I was hoping you might have time for a quick consult." I took a slow, unhurried sip of my coffee. Consultation. Now that was a generous way to frame it. "I'm not so sure that's really appropriate, considering how things ended," I said slowly, choosing my words with care. Derek cleared his throat on the other end of the line. "Look, Riley, we're willing to pay you for your time." Nathan might have acted a bit too quickly. "Hasty," I repeated, letting the word hang there like a joke. "That's what we're calling it now?" There was a pause. "It's just, the documentation is a little specialized." I nearly laughed out loud. Specialized was his polite way of saying no one could make heads or tails of the shorthand I'd used. Notes and formatting built around the way my brain worked, not some off-the-shelf Team Wiki. Sure, I documented everything, but it was basically a second language. And guess what? I was the only fluent speaker. "I'm afraid I'm a bit tied up at the moment," I told him. "Maybe Marcus, with all his experience, can sort it out." "Riley," Derek started, but I cut him off. "I really do wish you all the best, Derek. I mean that." Then I hung up. My phone buzzed immediately with a text. "We can double your consultation rate. Please reconsider." I set it down on the counter without answering. Let him sit with that for a while. That evening, as I was chopping vegetables for dinner, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was from Samir Patel, a junior engineer I'd taken under my wing when no one else had time for him. The subject line read, "You won't believe this." Samir had always been one of the good ones. Loyal, sharp, genuinely grateful for the help I'd given him. His message was short, but heavy. "Riley, everything's going sideways here. Marcus can't figure out your authentication system. 3 clients have already flagged serious issues after the latest release. Nathan's blaming the team, but everyone knows it's because no one understands your architecture. Derek's in full-blown panic mode. Just thought you should know. We miss you. Samir." I sat down at the kitchen counter, staring at the screen. I hadn't expected things to unravel quite this fast. A part of me felt genuine concern for the people still stuck in that mess. Most of them didn't deserve to be caught in the fallout, but another part, the one still smarting from Nathan's smug dismissal, felt something else entirely. Satisfaction. A spark of validation. Then my phone rang again. This time it was Camille. "Just got a call from Codaxis's legal team," she said without preamble. "They want to talk about a consulting arrangement." "Already?" I blinked. Things were spinning out faster than even I'd predicted. "They're being vague," she said, her voice even, but it sounds like they're having technical difficulties. What do you think I should do? I say let 'em sweat a bit longer, she replied. The more they struggle, the stronger your position becomes. When I hung up, something inside me shifted. A quiet but steady realization. The power had moved into my hands. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about being seen, being recognized for the work I had poured myself into. By the time the 4th week rolled around, the messages were coming in more frequently. Derek called. Then Marcus. Even Samir, again, asking unofficially if I could maybe just explain a few things. I kept them all at arm's length, giving vague answers if I responded at all. While they scrambled, I kept myself busy. I wasn't job hunting. I was doing recon. I met with 3 of Codaxis's competitors, not because I was looking to jump ship, but to get a read on the market. I needed to know exactly where I stood, what leverage I really had. And then, right on cue, exactly 1 month after I'd walked out of that glass-walled office, my phone rang. Nathan's name lit up the screen. "Riley," he said, his voice straining to sound casual. "I think we might have gotten off on the wrong foot. The board and I have been reviewing everything, and we believe there may have been some miscommunication." "Miscommunication," I repeated flatly. "About what, exactly?" "About your value to the company," he said, clearly forcing the words out. "We'd like to bring you back as a consultant to help us with the transition." I almost threw his own words back at him. "No one's going to remember your contributions." But I didn't. No point in tipping my hand. "I'm not really interested in consulting right now," I said coolly. "But thanks for the offer. Riley, be reasonable. We're talking a significant fee, 6 figures for just a few weeks of work." "I'm quite busy at the moment," I replied, echoing what I'd told Derek. "Best of luck with everything." And I ended the call before he could say another word. Right away, I dialed Camille. "Nathan just offered me a consulting deal. 6 figures. They're getting desperate," she said, calm as ever. "But we need to be smart. Have you been watching their product lately?" Oh, I had. The client dashboard was glitchy, plagued with outages. Their Twitter support account was in full crisis mode, replying to angry customers around the clock. And that stock bump they got after the funding round? It had tanked 15% in the last week. "Not looking good," I said. "Perfect," Camille replied. "Because I've been doing a little digging of my own. Did you know Nathan's been presenting your authentication system as his work to the investors?" My heart dropped. "What?" "I've got a contact on their board," she continued. "Apparently, Nathan's been taking credit for your work for a while. The funding came through because they thought he built the system that sets them apart. That hit hard. Somehow, even after everything, it still managed to shock me. It was one thing to be dismissed like I didn't matter. It was another thing entirely to have my work stolen and passed off as someone else's. This changes things," I said, my voice steady but low. "So what's our next move?" "We give it 1 more week," she said. "Let them flounder. Then we send a formal notice asserting your retained intellectual property rights." "Can we actually do that?" "I signed an employment agreement." "You did," she said, "but that agreement covers work done while you were on the clock. The prototype for your authentication system, the version that became the foundation of their product, you developed it before you were even hired. And we have the original GitHub repository, date-stamped and clean." I sat there for a moment, letting it all sink in. I had receipts. "You brought it with you," Camille said, "refined it for their purposes, but the core intellectual property? That could still be argued as yours." I could picture it vividly. The early weekends I spent holed up in my apartment, coding late into the night, piecing together that authentication system before Codeaxis was even a blip on my radar. Back then, it was just a side project, something I was building out of pure curiosity and challenge. When Nathan finally approached me about joining the team, I'd mentioned it in passing. He'd waved it off, said it didn't matter. Funny how that little brush-off might end up costing him everything. So we actually have leverage, I said, the realization starting to land. More than leverage, Camille replied. We've got a legal position strong enough to freeze their entire operation, if it comes to that. I leaned back in my chair, trying to absorb it all. When I walked away from Codeaxis, I felt stripped of any power, like they'd taken everything and left me with a hollow title and a generic NDA. But now? The game had flipped so hard I almost felt bad for them. Almost. By the 5th week after I left, things at Codeaxis hit a full-blown crisis. Their stock dropped another 20%, and there were whispers floating around in private loop chat groups and industry forums, rumors that key clients were heading for the exits. My phone had gone quiet. No more desperate calls, no pleading voicemails. Just silence. And that silence was louder than anything. I was stretched out on the couch, watching some documentary I wasn't even really paying attention to when the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I blinked twice just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. Natalie Sloan, lead investor from Summit Bridge Capital, was standing on my porch in heels and a blazer, her expression all business. "Ms. Morgan," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "Apologies for dropping in unannounced, but this couldn't wait. May I come in?" I hesitated for a second, then stepped aside and motioned her in. Natalie had always been professional, polite during board presentations, but we'd never spoken directly. Not like this. She sat down on my couch like she owned the room and got straight to the point. "Codeaxis is in serious trouble," she said, her tone sharp. "And I believe you know why." "I've heard there've been some technical challenges," I said, keeping things neutral. She didn't blink. "The authentication system is failing, and no one left at the company knows how to fix it. Nathan told the board they had redundancies in place. Clearly, they didn't." I stayed quiet. No need to fill the silence. "What's even more alarming," she continued, "is that we've uncovered some inconsistencies in what we were told about the company's technical leadership. Nathan positioned himself as the mastermind behind the architecture. He implied you were just executing his vision." A short, dry laugh escaped before I could stop it. "Is that really the story he went with?" "It is," Natalie said, "but we've had our own technical advisors take a hard look, and the evidence tells a different story. You weren't just part of the team. You were the architect." I let out a slow breath. I wanted to be surprised, but I wasn't. Not really. "I'm not shocked," I said, "but I am disappointed." "As am I," she replied. "Summit Bridge Capital invested $10 million, in large part because of what we believe to be true. That's why I'm here. The board's called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Nathan doesn't know I'm speaking with you, but I think it's important you're there." That caught me off guard. I had expected negotiations, maybe legal threats. Not a seat at the table. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I asked. "Tell the truth," she said plainly. "Explain what's actually going on with the system and what our options are. In return, I'll make sure your role is acknowledged. Officially. Properly." I paused, thinking it over. "I appreciate that, Miss Sloan. But my lawyer's been very clear. I can't engage directly with Codeaxis without certain legal protections in place." She nodded, like she'd been expecting that answer. "Fair. Would you be open to participating with your attorney present? This isn't some backroom deal. We need transparency. The investors deserve to know the real story." I didn't answer right away. It was risky. But it was also a chance to speak directly to the people who could actually make a difference. "I'll have to speak with my attorney," I said. Of course. She stood to leave. The meeting's at 10 a.m. I hope to see you there. As soon as the door closed behind her, I called Camille and filled her in. Well, she said thoughtfully, this came a little faster than I expected, but it could play out in your favor. If you walk into that room, you're not a disgruntled ex-employee anymore. You're the key to fixing their mess. What about the formal notice we planned? We still send it, Camille said without hesitation. In fact, I'll deliver it tonight. Let them know exactly where you stand before you walk into that meeting. I agreed, and she promised to handle it right away. That night, sleep barely came. I tossed and turned, replaying every boardroom interaction, every ignored email, every late night in that warehouse office. I hadn't asked for this confrontation, but I was ready for it. This wasn't about payback. It was about truth. Nathan had tried to scrub my name from the company's history, but tomorrow I'd make sure it was carved back in. This time, with ink that couldn't be erased. The Codaxis offices looked just like they had the day I left. Polished, modern, cold, but something felt different the second I walked through the front doors. I wasn't the same person who had walked out 6 weeks ago. Camille walked beside me as we passed through reception, both of us in step, quiet. Heads turned. The whispers started immediately and followed us all the way to the conference room. Inside, the tension practically hummed. The board members sat around the long table, Natalie among them, along with 3 other major investors and the full executive team. Nathan sat at the head of the table, but that air of untouchable confidence he usually wore? It was gone. Derek looked like he hadn't seen sleep in days. Ms. Morgan, thank you for coming, Natalie said, standing to greet me. And this must be your attorney, Ms. Harper. That's correct, Camille said with a polite nod. She set her briefcase down with purpose. We're here in good faith, but for the record, Codaxis's legal team was served with a formal notification of retained IP rights last night. The room went dead quiet. Nathan's face turned an impressive shade of red. This is ridiculous, Nathan snapped, his voice sharp. You signed an employment contract. It clearly states that anything you created while at Codaxis belongs to the company. I know exactly what I signed, I said, keeping my voice even. But the authentication system we're discussing? The original version was developed before I ever joined the company. I've got full documentation, complete with timestamps from the original GitHub repo. One of the board members, a silver-haired man I recognized as Raymond Chu from Harbor Point Holdings, leaned forward, frowning. Is that true, Nathan? Did you know about this? Nathan's jaw tightened. Riley's twisting things. Maybe she had some early version, but anything significant was developed on company time. Without saying a word, I pulled my laptop from my bag and connected it to the conference room screen. If I may, I said, I'd like to show you something. Natalie gave me a small nod. I opened the GitHub repo and navigated to the commit history, clearly showing a detailed development trail that started before I'd ever signed a contract with Codaxis. Then I brought up a series of emails between Nathan and me from my first few weeks on the team. In black and white, I had told him I was adapting my own system for use in our new product. You'll notice, Camille added smoothly, that Mr. Drake acknowledged Riley's prior work in these emails. However, at no point did he formalize any transfer of intellectual property rights. The standard employment agreement doesn't cover work done prior to employment. The room went still. You could feel the air shift as the board processed what they were seeing. Nathan squirmed slightly in his seat. But that's not all, I said, flipping to a slide from the company's Series A investor presentation. Here's what you were shown during the funding round. The authentication system is described as a major competitive differentiator, yet my name doesn't appear anywhere. Raymond took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Nathan, you positioned yourself as the mind behind these systems. I oversaw their development, Nathan said defensively. Supervision doesn't equal invention, I replied. And let's be honest, your oversight mostly consisted of pushing unrealistic timelines and claiming the credit once the work was done. Across the table, Derek finally spoke up, his voice tired but clear. I can confirm that Riley was the one who built the authentication system. She led its design, implementation, and integration. Without her, we've been struggling to maintain it, and the last 6 weeks have made that painfully obvious. Nathan shot Derek a look that could have cut glass, but the damage had already been done. The board wasn't looking at me like a disgruntled former employee anymore. They were looking at Nathan like a liability. What are you hoping to achieve here, Ms. Morgan? Another board member asked, his tone cautious. Camille spoke up before I could. My client isn't interested in dismantling Codaxis. She believes in the product she helped build. What she does want is proper recognition, fair compensation for her intellectual property, and legal assurance that her contributions won't be misrepresented moving forward. And if we refuse? Nathan asked, his voice low. Then the IP notification stands, Camille said calmly. And Codaxis will no longer be legally allowed to use the authentication system, which, as you know, would effectively render your product useless. For a long moment, nobody said anything, but the tension was thick as realization slowly set in. The company's entire valuation, its functionality, its future, everything was hanging by a thread. And I was holding the scissors. The meeting dragged on for another 3 hours. Point by point, we laid out our evidence. Nathan tried to push back, but the more he spoke, the weaker his position became. The more we showed, the clearer it was to everyone in the room who had actually built the core of Codaxis. Eventually, Raymond Chu called for a short recess. The board members left the room together, shutting the door behind them. When they returned, Natalie Sloan stood, and this time there was a distinct shift in her presence. Calm, yes, but with authority that hadn't been there earlier. After careful deliberation, she began, the board has agreed on several actions. She turned to Nathan. First, we're initiating an immediate leadership transition. Nathan, we respect what you started here, but there have been serious misrepresentations under your direction. Nathan's face went pale. You can't be serious. I built this company. With Riley's technology, Raymond added pointedly. Technology you failed to acknowledge and actively misattributed. Natalie continued. Second, we'd like to offer Riley the position of Chief Technology Officer. It will come with appropriate equity and full recognition of her foundational role in the product. My heart skipped. I hadn't expected that. In addition, she said, we're prepared to establish a licensing agreement for the authentication system, complete with royalties tied to future revenue. Camille and I exchanged a glance. That was everything we had hoped to secure, maybe even a little more. And finally, Natalie said, the board is requiring a public statement correcting the record, including Riley's role as the original architect of the core technology. Nathan pushed back from the table suddenly, rising to his feet. You're making a mistake, he snapped. You're letting someone who's holding the company hostage walk in and take over. No, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I'm not holding anything hostage. I'm just making sure the truth finally gets its place at the table. Raymond looked Nathan square in the eye. The decision's final. You can remain on as a strategic advisor in a reduced role, or step away completely. Your choice. Nathan looked around, but no one met his gaze. And without another word, He turned and stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind him. The silence afterward was heavy, but it didn't feel tense. It felt like closure. I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter, but stronger. I felt justice. 3 months later, I stood on a small stage at Code Access HQ, addressing the team and a few invited members of the press. So much had changed since that meeting, it almost didn't feel like the same company anymore. Today marks an important milestone, I began. With the launch of our latest platform update, I told the room, we're not just rolling out improvements. We're rebuilding from the ground up on a foundation of transparency and true collaboration. The applause that followed wasn't wild or showy. It was steady, appreciative, and real, and standing there under the soft lights of the auditorium, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. The authentication system that had once been my solo passion project was now in the capable hands of a full engineering team. It wasn't mine anymore. It was ours. And every single person touching it was credited, celebrated, and supported. The documentation we created was detailed and accessible, designed so no one would ever be left guessing or held hostage by tribal knowledge again. After the announcement, Natalie made her way through the crowd toward me, her smile warm and genuine. "The investors are thrilled with the turnaround," she said. "Support tickets have dropped by 87%, and some of the clients who bailed? They're coming back. It's all thanks to the team," I replied, meaning it. I was proud of what we'd done, how far we'd come. "That may be true," she said, "but none of this would have happened without your leadership. You were the spark that lit the change." She paused, then added with a slight lift of her brow, "By the way, heard anything about Nathan lately?" I shook my head. I hadn't given him much thought since the board meeting. "He turned down the advisor role," she said. "Walked away completely. Word is he's trying to start something new, but funding's proving difficult. This industry talks." I felt a small pang. Not regret, not sadness exactly, just recognition. "I hope he takes something meaningful from it," I said after a beat. "As do I," Natalie replied. "Though some lessons come with a higher price than others." Later that afternoon, as I was settling back into my office, an unexpected email popped into my inbox. The sender, Nathan Drake. I stared at it for a long moment before clicking it open. It was short. "Riley, I owe you an apology. I should have recognized your contributions instead of trying to minimize them. The company's better off with you at the helm." Nathan. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words sink in. I hadn't expected it. Maybe he meant it, maybe he didn't. But that wasn't really the point. I thought for a moment, then typed out my reply. "Nathan, thank you for the apology. I wish you well in whatever comes next. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that matter most." Riley. It wasn't about forgiveness or pretending like none of it had happened. It was about closure. About finally being seen for what I had built, what I had fought for, and what I had refused to let be erased. I didn't need revenge. I had something better. The truth, spoken, documented, and finally, undeniably mine.